Hello everyone, it's a lovely Monday morning in July and today I'm in Easingwold, which is north of York in North Yorkshire, and I'll be cycling in an anti-clockwise loop from Easingwold, round in the loop to Coxwold, where we'll be looking at the former vicarage and the church to find out more about the grisly story of what happened to 18th century author and vicar Laurence Sterne. And after that we'll be cycling back to Easingwold along quite a beautiful and easy stretch. So this video is a shortened version of the other video and goes straight into the backstory of who was Laurence Sterne and why did he end up with 2 gravestones and such a grisly ending to his life. So keep your speakers on if you want to hear the story as we go on an exploration from Easingwold up to Coxwold on my bike. And the main subject, there are other bits too, but the main subject of today's ride centres on the village of Coxwold, which we cycled through before, and we'll be visiting probably about halfway through this ride. Centres upon the very old ancient building which is called Shandy Hall, which is just opposite the curious church with its octagonal tower in the village of Coxwold. And soon I'll get around to continuing the gruesome story. It's quite a shocking story. There's a bloke of Irish ancestry in the 18th century, middle of the 18th century, called Laurence Sterne. And although his parents were Irish, they kind of adopted Yorkshire as their county. Laurence Sterne was quite penniless because his father died in Jamaica, probably of some sort of malaria or something. Sterne married this woman who apparently was quite unpleasant. So say people who met her, and after their second daughter was born, they kind of parted company. Now, Laurence Sterne contracted tuberculosis, known as consumption in those days, probably end of his teens, when he was at Cambridge University, and it plagued him all his life really badly. His short life, because he only lived to his 40s. But the thing is, Sterne was also a vicar of the Church of England, and he has worked at a few parishes in this area before becoming the vicar of Coxwold and moving into what is now called Shandy Hall. Before moving there, he'd already begun the novel, should we say, that he became famous for, which I don't think many people these days would have on their to-read book list. It's 9 volumes long. It's called The Life and Opinions of Tristram Shandy gentleman. And when Laurence Sterne moved to Coxwold, he named his home after Tristan Shandy, hence why it's called Shandy Hall, which we'll go past later. But this 9-volume book is quite humorous in terms of 18th century humour, and it rambles. It's known for digressing. It's supposed to be a sort of autobiography of Tristan Shandy, but it isn't really. It just goes on and on and on, apparently, and doesn't even describe his birth until the 3rd volume. Sterne travelled extensively to London, presumably to promote his book, and he wrote other books too, and to Europe to try and alleviate his tuberculosis. So I don't know how much time he spent actually being a vicar at Coxwold, and also he had a bash at farming, which failed apparently. Anyway, and he had all these affairs with women, despite being very ill with tuberculosis. And that's all the backstory before we get to the gruesome part. But he is quite famous in literature, history circles. You can find excerpts of his books online. I'll tell you more about what happened next in a while. Now, it was the Lord of the Manor at Newber Priory who instated Laurence Sterne as vicar of Coxwold. It's literally just up the road. I'll tell you more about the gruesome story. You can probably tell from the thumbnail that it's something to do with grave robbers. In the 18th century, it was very common to break open the graves of recently buried people and sell the bodies for dissection to the various operating theatres, which were literally like a horseshoe-shaped theatre, lecture theatre type thing. And strangely enough, it wasn't illegal. It was frowned upon, and you could be whipped for it if you were found, but it wasn't illegal. So, needless to say, it happened quite a lot until it was made illegal in the 19th century. I'm not sure whether it was then when it was made illegal. I think that's maybe when they allowed executed prisoners they allowed their bodies to be released for dissection instead. People used to place heavy stone slabs over the graves to deter the grave robbers. But apparently, back in the day, back then, one of the reasons why it wasn't illegal was a bit of a mini climb here, was because the dead actually did not belong to anyone by law. They had no status, no one owned them, even the family. So if no one owns it, then there was no reason, I guess, why their body shouldn't be stolen and sold. So there was Laurence Sterne, suffering from years of heavy lung bleeds from TB. And when he was in London once, in his lodgings, presumably to meet his publisher or something, he caught flu, which proved too much for his tubercular body, and he died. Yeah, I think he was only 40 something, 43, 45, something like that. And it was very sad because the only people present at his death was an old nurse who was brought in to care for him, and nurses in those days weren't like nurses these days. Probably couldn't wait to see if there was anything of value on the body. But just before the moment of death, somebody popped in to see Sterne about something or other, and just happened to be there at the moment of his death. Apparently he reached upwards as if trying to push away something and then dropped dead, according to the writings of that man. He wasn't buried with any ceremony. I think it was the next best thing to a pauper's grave. And he did have a headstone, but I don't know if that came later. But being in an insecure grave probably made him more susceptible to grave robbers and body snatchers. Maybe. Anyway, just days after he was buried in London, his body was snatched by the grave robbers, taken to Cambridge, where it was sold to surgeons for dissection in front of the usual audience of the time. So the surgeon began his dissection. He sawed off the top of the skull. And the story goes that just shortly after doing that, somebody in the audience stood up and said, "Stop!" because he actually recognised the body on the slab as Laurence Sterne, who had been buried the week before, or a few weeks before. What horror, imagine that. So the body was whisked away back to London and hastily reburied, where it remained until the 1960s. In the 1960s, the burial spot was due for redevelopment. And the Laurence Sterne Trust, who operate Shandy Hall in Coxwold, applied to have the gravestone so they could put it in Coxwold Church. And they also applied to have the body too, so they could rebury that. They had a bit of a problem, apparently, finding which was his skeleton. Kind of process of elimination by comparing skulls to portraits and busts of Laurence Sterne's head. And also the fact that one skull had the top sawn off. But they weren't sure about the bones, so they just gathered what they assumed were his bones along with the skull and brought it back to Coxwold. So inside Coxwold Church, apparently, there is the London gravestone, and outside is a new gravestone, one newish, from the 1960s, 70s, where Sterne's remains, or what they thought were Sterne's remains, were reburied and have been there ever since. Hopefully, if they are his remains, and even if they're not his remains, the bones will remain in the ground forever. Must have been quite worry when you died in the 18th century that your body would be dug up by the body snatchers. Imagine, and I think they did, people went to great lengths to prevent that from happening. What a gruesome story. And imagine, I mean, this guy in the dissection theatre, I don't know if it's his friend. It might have been a friend who recognised him. Imagine that. You're about to watch an anonymous dissection, and there before you on the slab is your friend who you know was dead and buried not long before. Well, not only that, but he was famous for his book and his other books. So we'll be going past Shandy Hall and we'll go and look, see if we can find the gravestones in Coxwold Church. The church has an octagonal tower, which is unusual. We're coming up on the right is Shandy Hall, where Laurence Sterne lived and wrote his later volumes of Tristram Shandy. Sometimes it's open, limited days, I think they're very old. Shandy Hall, here dwelt Laurence Sterne, many years incumbent of Coxwold. Here he wrote Tristram Shandy and The Sentimental Journey. Died in London in 1763, aged 55, not 45, I got that wrong. It looks like the sort of place that you'd expect to be haunted, but I can't find anything about ghosts. I'm surprised it's not haunted by the ghost of Sterne, his corpse having been through everything it went through. I mean, he became so famous that Sir Joshua Reynolds painted his portrait. And yet I doubt many people have heard of him these days, unless you are a student of 18th century English literature. But it's the gruesome story that attracted me. He certainly did not rest in peace. Not until the 1960s or 70s. Let's go and see if we can find his grave, which may or may not contain his remains. I know the gravestone is propped up against, or is by a wall, whether that's the church wall or the cemetery wall, I don't know. Graveyard, cemetery. But his original gravestone is in the church. I've never been here before. Oh, looking up there, can you see? Right up to the octagonal tower. I don't know why it's octagonal. Oh, here we are. That is his original gravestone from London. So this stone, which marks the place of Laurence Sterne's grave in London, was moved to Coxwold when his remains were reinterred here in 1969. Oh, this is unusual in that it's got box pews, which I think were a Georgian addition. It's a big place. My, oh my. Look at these tombs. These guys, I can't read the writing, it's too small. This is an unusual shape. I wonder why that is. Oh, I suppose more people can kneel around it, can't they, when they take communion? This Elizabethan monument. Bloke and his wife. And their rather alarming sons. Look at his eyes. And that. Oh, and some more Elizabethan people here. I'm guessing they were the incumbents of Newber Priory, maybe? So that's Elizabethan. Quite a fancy organ. Church door reminds me, I've got an amazing church door to show you on one of the rides, dating, what it is, a Viking door. So let's see if we can find the actual grave. That is quite an impressive church, that. Must have had a bit of money spent on it by the local gentry. Gorgeous views. Laurence Sterne. Here we are. (1713 to 1768), author of Tristan Shandy and A Sentimental Journey. So it might or might not be his bones that are interred here, but if they're not his, then his bones are underneath whatever development it was in London. So he lies at rest, either here or underneath whatever it is in London, block of flats or an office building, who knows. It is a lovely village. That's old, isn't it, over there? Evie. What's Evie? Just been drawn by a gravestone. Oh, it's so sad. Little Evie, just 6 hours old, beautiful and brave, cherished, safe in Jesus' arms, forever loved and forever missed. Oh, that sort of thing makes me want to cry. Evie. Baby Evie, 6 hours old. Oh, that's so sad. Let's all remember baby Evie. Evie. Always makes me want to cry, because I know how precious it is to have a baby. I can't imagine what it must be like to lose them, and so soon. Baby Evie. My great-grandma, her firstborn, her son, Headley, he died when he was just 6 months old. She had him for 6 months. Oh, notice, there is no lead on the church roof. It was stolen in the 1990s. It makes you sick. It really does.